WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I'm Molly Gambhir. Starting off with some breaking news coming in. And with more tariffs and more threats, the White House is once again using a rather familiar playbook, bullying and deflecting responsibility for the West's failures in Ukraine. In fact, in a dramatic move, US President Donald Trump has slapped an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods in a bid to try and punish India for buying Russian oil. You heard that right. Donald Trump has imposed an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, and the move comes hours after talks between Washington and Moscow over the Russia-Ukraine war failed to actually yield a breakthrough. And the new levy, which will be stacking on top of a 25% country-specific tariff, is set to be implemented overnight, will take effect within 21 days. 21 days. Remember, Donald Trump has given Moscow an August 8 deadline to reach a ceasefire or face potential sanctions. He has threatened trading partners with so-called secondary tariffs to discourage purchases of Russian energy. But here's the deal. This is not about oil. This is not about what India does and does not do. This is about Washington's frustration and its own failure to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. So instead of asking hard questions at home, in a way, Donald Trump is pointing fingers at India. And on Tuesday, in an interview with CNBC, he said, and I'm quoting, "They are fueling the war machine. If they are going to do that, I am not going to be happy," quote unquote. But let's be clear here. India is not fueling the war in Ukraine, just like India did not close the door on trade talks. In fact, India was open to talks. New Delhi has consistently engaged Washington, negotiating trade terms in good faith. But what did India get in return? A tariff hike, no deal, and more threats. In fact, India, a longtime partner of America, has been clear from day one of the Russia-Ukraine war. India's policy on the Ukraine war has not changed. India is on the side of peace. You look at any quote, any news report, any soundbite, from bilateral meetings to multilateral summits, you will find India consistently uttering these words on the Russia-Ukraine war. India is on the side of peace, and India has offered to help talk and also supported de-escalation of the tensions over the war. But instead of acknowledging that, Donald Trump is trying to twist New Delhi's arm, hoping a trade war with India will somehow end a war in Europe. Calling it what it is, an unfair, dangerous tactic that punishes India for making economic decisions based on its own national interest. In fact, India is the world's third largest oil consumer. Its economy depends on affordable energy to grow and uplift over 1 billion people. And Russian crude sold at a discount makes economic sense. And if there was ever a time for a reminder, it is now. In fact, remember, it was Donald Trump himself who forced India to stop oil imports from Iran and Venezuela. Has Donald Trump conveniently forgotten that? Because here's another kicker here. The same Russian oil that India refines is sold back to the West, including the US and the UK. In fact, India's imports are helping stabilize global fuel prices. And Washington has, it seems, conveniently forgotten that. Also, why the sudden moral high ground, and why now? Why India? Because from where we are sitting, it's pretty clear America has failed Ukraine. Trump has failed to get Ukraine and Russia to find peace, and so blaming India is easier than admitting defeat. India's ties with Russia run deep, from defense deals to decades of diplomatic trust. But that has not stopped India from strengthening relations with America as well. And New Delhi has bought more arms from Washington in recent years. In fact, joint Quad partnership stood as a democratic counterweight in the Indo-Pacific. But what about this tariff move? In a way, it threatens to undo all of that. Trump's trade war is short-sighted, it's also dangerous, and India is not a pawn in someone else's war, not a scapegoat for West's problems and failures, and certainly not a country that will buckle under pressure. And if peace is truly the goal here, then it's time that Donald Trump stopped waging trade wars. In fact, in the latest, India has officially responded to US President Donald Trump's latest tariff salvo. The Ministry of External Affairs calling the move, I'm quoting, unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable, quote unquote. And in that strong statement, India says it will take all necessary steps to protect its national interests, making it clear that energy security for 1.4 billion Indians cannot be compromised. Let's go straight across now to Susan Teherani, who's with us, who's been tracking those developments in the United States. Susan, first up, contextualize for our viewers what's happening here. A lot has happened, in fact, in the last 24 hours. We've been decoding Donald Trump's statements, where he was also asked to explain and to give a response on U.S. importing from Russia. And he said that he will get back to the reporter. So that is also something that we've been talking about. Tell us more about the latest move.
Yeah, and that's where most of the criticism really comes from, is a sort of this perception that the United States and Europe, to a certain extent, is really pursuing a policy of hypocrisy when it comes to dealing with Russia. We have a little more information about what this executive order entails since we got it from the White House. It's 25% ad valorem tariff, which means a tax on the value of goods on all Indian imports here in the United States. And this applies in addition to any existing tariffs. So 25%, that's 50%. As you mentioned, it kicks off 21 days after the order is signed. There are some exemptions, however. It doesn't apply to goods that are already protected under specific national security rules and under certain exemptions in prior executive orders, and certain U.S. foreign trade zone articles admitted under quote-unquote domestic status. However, the order also specifically names the date as September 17th as a cutoff for certain but not all exemptions. Now, this, of course, what does this mean? Well, India exporters may now face a disadvantage in the U.S. market due to this extra 25% tariffs affecting sectors like textile, pharmaceuticals, garments, and IT hardwire. But as you also alluded to, it could also really dampen relations between India and the United States in other areas, especially since India has been such a reliable partner and a counterbalance to China. So again, as you mentioned, a lot of questions at hand, but it all really does come down to how the United States and the Trump administration in particular is sort of left in somewhat of a quagmire when it comes to dealing with the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, and the U.S. president has expressed frustration with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin multiple times. Tell us more about where things are expected to go from here as far as those talks with Moscow are concerned.
Right. So we do know that Steve Witkoff was in Moscow. He held talks with Russian officials. Vladimir Putin himself said that these talks are constructive. how many times have we heard that, considering the fact that just shortly before and after, during these talks, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant was attacked in Ukraine. So the Russia war machine isn't abating. There isn't any even kind of a temporary ceasefire as these talks go on. One of the concerns that some policymakers, even on the Republican side here, had was that, India is a very reliable partner for the United States, not just in terms of trade, but in other areas. And to give, a country like China, who's also very close to Russia, a 90-day grace period with the tariffs, and then sort of go after India as the easier target, may not be a very smart policy from the Trump administration. But nonetheless, yes, as you mentioned, despite the fact that talks are ongoing, there really isn't any light at the end of the tunnel to find any kind of negotiated settlement, at least for now, in the Russia-Ukraine war.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Susan Tehrani, thanks very much for getting us those updates. And we're shifting focus for now. When it comes to waging trade wars with hardline tariff measures, US President Donald Trump seems to be on a roll. We've seen that panning out in the additional 25% tariffs that have been imposed by America on India. And steep would be an understatement in a way to describe Trump's tariff curveball against India. On the other hand, he said that he was very close to a deal with China to extend a trade truce that saw both countries reducing the retaliatory tariff hikes, as well as easing export restrictions on rare earth minerals. Now, for many, there would be some concern. However, the India-US tariff rift may not be limited to the world's oldest and largest democracies only. The ongoing tariff tensions could also have a far-reaching impact on the Indo-Pacific, aimed at countering China's growing influence in the region, more specifically the Quad. Just for context here, the Quad, which also includes Japan and Australia, was formed in 2004 but remained dormant until 2017. And even as Trump resurrected that alliance in his first term, his predecessor, Joe Biden, remember, included it as part of his Indo-Pacific strategy, which received fresh recognition in 2021. That's just for context. Now, coming back to Trump's tariffs on Quad partners, while Trump imposed a 15% tariff on Japan, he said that tariffs of up to 250% on pharmaceutical imports from Australia might be imposed, against which a 10% tariff had been levied previously. In fact, the question still is, with the latest development of a major tariff reset against a member country, could it significantly undermine the Quad's momentum? With rates on imports from America's trade partners ranging from 10% to 41%, India is not quite in a favorable spot, with a 50% tariff now slapped against it, which surpasses its Asian allies. But just how serious is the situation? And most importantly, how prepared is India for this tariff ultimatum and also its impact on the economy? Earlier, the Reserve Bank of India governor said in a statement, even as global trade challenges continue to linger, but prospects for the Indian economy remain bright. Listen to this.
Geopolitical uncertainties have somewhat abated, even though global trade challenges continue to linger. Over the medium term also, the Indian economy holds bright prospects in the changing world order, drawing on its inherent strength, robust fundamentals, and comfortable buffers.
Now, the question also is, will that now stand changed with the tariff percentage now increased? In fact, will the ripple effect also be felt by other member countries of the Quad? One thing is for sure as of now, at the other end of will he, won't he, when it comes to imposing or suspending sanctions or making critical decisions that impact global trade and bilateral ties, Donald Trump certainly is his own boss. Someone who only and only listens to himself. And the cost of this will very well be borne by America's trading partners and, to a certain extent, Americans as well. And shifting focus to Gaza now, US President Donald Trump seems to have given the green light for the Israeli takeover of Gaza. In a statement that's ignited fresh controversy, Donald Trump has refused to take a stand on a possible full military takeover of Gaza by Israel. Asked whether he supports the move, this is how Donald Trump replied.
Yeah, we are there now trying to get people fed. As you know, $60 million was given by the United States fairly recently to supply food, and a lot of food, frankly, for the people of Gaza that are obviously not doing too well with the food. And I know Israel is going to help us with that in terms of distribution and also money. We also have the Arab states are going to help us with that in terms of the money and possibly distribution. So that's what I'm focused on. As far as the rest of it, I really can't say. That's going to be pretty much up to Israel.
That's going to be pretty much up to Israel, quote unquote. That's what Donald Trump said. His comments come amid growing speculation that Israel is preparing for a complete ground occupation of Gaza, a plan that is reportedly favored by the Israeli Prime Minister. In fact, on Tuesday, Netanyahu met with top security officials behind closed doors for over 3 hours. Israeli media now reporting that a full-scale military occupation is on the table, but not without pushback. Like we told you last night, Israel's Army Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, seems to be against it. He is said to have issued a stern warning. A full occupation, according to the Israeli Army Chief, would be like walking into a trap. Instead, Zamir has suggested more targeted encirclements of Hamas strongholds in places like Gaza City, as well as refugee camps that are densely populated areas where Israeli hostages are believed to be held. But the Israeli Defense Minister has been quick to strike back. He wrote on social media, I'm quoting here, "The Chief of Staff may express his views, but once the political ranks decide, the IDF will execute those orders with determination." Netanyahu is now expected to convene his war cabinet again on Thursday to finalize the next possibly decisive phase of the war. And all this as the world watches on in horror, looking at what's unfolding in Gaza. Earlier this morning itself, Palestinians in Gaza City cleared the debris and rubble that was caused by an overnight Israeli strike that hit the area surrounding a UNRWA clinic. The building had been warned of a strike, in fact, and those in it evacuated earlier in the day. Meanwhile, people mourned their loved ones who were killed while trying to secure aid yesterday and held funerals outside the Al-Shifa hospital.
Where should we go? There was a strike overnight. Only God knows what happened all night, almost until 2 a.m. We stayed out in the streets. Look, do you see how we look?
Remember, the war in Gaza began when Hamas killed 1,200 people and took 251 hostages in that attack on southern Israel on the 7th of October 2023. Less than 2 years. In fact, Israel's offensive against Hamas in Gaza has continued. It has since killed more than 60,000 Palestinians. Much of the tiny coastal enclave has been devastated. Homes, schools, mosques, hospitals have been reduced to rubble. Most of the population has been displaced multiple times. Aid groups saying residents are on the verge of famine. Even aid distribution sites have become a scene of death and destruction in a way. On Monday, dozens of people were killed or injured as crowds rushed towards food distribution points and airdropped parcels. Many of the casualties were taken to the Al-Abda hospital after being directly targeted in the area near the Netzarim corridor, a military buffer zone established by the Israeli soldiers in central Gaza during the war. But you see, it's not just the Palestinians who are paying the price of the war. A shocking new video released by Hamas this week showed Israeli hostage Eviatar David, gaunt and frail. He was reportedly forced to dig his own grave. Donald Trump, speaking to reporters, had described the footage as horrible. But while the focus remains on the fate of the 49 hostages still in Gaza, of whom only 20 are believed to be alive, the humanitarian catastrophe in the Strip is deepening by the day, and the UN has repeatedly warned that over 2 million Palestinians are at imminent risk of famine, and that the trickle of food, water and medicine allowed in is nowhere near enough. And as we mentioned earlier, Israel's campaign has so far killed more than 61,000 Palestinians. And now, with calls for a ceasefire growing louder and diplomatic efforts faltering, Netanyahu is poised to escalate. India is ramping up its military defenses with a major new wave of weapon purchases and system upgrades. The government has cleared defense procurement proposals worth 67,000 crore rupees, or around $8 billion, to enhance operational capability of the armed forces. This strategic move comes amid an increasing focus on modernizing India's warfighting capabilities across land, air and sea. The Defence Acquisition Council, led by the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, has given the green light for a range of new acquisitions and modernization plans for the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. The approved proposals will significantly boost India's ability to deter and respond to threats across multiple terrains and theatres. For ground operations, the Army will soon receive thermal imaging night sights for the drivers of BMP infantry combat vehicles. These advanced devices will basically enable Indian mechanized infantry units to operate effectively in complete darkness, enhancing both mobility and battlefield awareness during the night missions. And the Indian Navy is also on track to improve its undersea warfare capabilities. It will induct compact autonomous surface vessels, specifically designed for anti-submarine operations. These unmanned craft are designed to help detect, track and eliminate submarine threats without risking lives. Alongside this, the Navy's missile systems will be seeing a major boost. New fire control systems and launchers for BrahMos missiles have been cleared, and the Barak 1 missile system is set for an upgrade, improving defense against the incoming threats. The Indian Air Force is also preparing to deploy cutting-edge radars in the mountains. And these high-performance sensors will reinforce surveillance along India's high-altitude borders, where terrain often limits visibility. All three services will also benefit from the acquisition of long-endurance, remotely piloted aircraft. These medium-altitude drones can stay airborne for extended hours, carry multiple weapons and operate deep into enemy territory. And in addition to the new acquisitions, the DAC also approved long-term maintenance and servicing plans for key Air Force platforms, including the C-17 and C-130J transport fleets. While the S-400 air defense system will now be covered under an annual maintenance contract, ensuring readiness at all times, these acquisitions and approvals coming at a time when India is testing powerful new indigenous missiles. The Defense Research and Development Organization has successfully conducted back-to-back trials of the Pralay missile, a quasi ballistic weapon that can carry a 1-ton warhead and strike targets between 150 and 500 kilometers away. Further, India is developing a bunker-buster version of the Agni-5 missile equipped with a hypersonic deep-penetration warhead. This weapon could destroy enemy command centers buried beneath fortified layers of rock and concrete. In fact, the acquisition and development of new missiles reflects a decisive push towards military self-reliance and battlefield superiority, enhancing the operational capabilities of the armed forces across all domains. In a potential shift in strategy, Russia is reportedly considering a limited pause in its aerial attacks on Ukraine to reduce potential economic sanctions from the United States. According to a report by Bloomberg, the Kremlin is exploring a temporary halt in drone and missile strikes, citing officials familiar with the ongoing discussions. This potential truce, however, depends on Ukraine's agreement to terms laid down. The move comes as US President Donald Trump intensifies efforts to end the war, now entering its fourth year. US envoy Steve Witkoff met with the Russian president earlier today, with the Kremlin stating that the 3-hour Putin-Witkoff-Ukraine talks were quote-unquote constructive. Putin's aide, meanwhile, told journalists in Moscow, and I'm quoting here, a quite useful and constructive conversation took place, quote-unquote, adding that besides Ukraine, Russia-US strategic cooperation was also discussed.
On our part, in particular on the Ukrainian issue, some signals were transmitted. Corresponding signals were also received from President Trump.
And according to the Bloomberg report, an air truce could serve as a concession from Moscow to avoid further US penalties, as the possibility of a full ceasefire remains slim, especially given that Russian forces continue to advance on the ground. According to reports, Russian forces now hold about 20% of Ukraine's territory. On the battlefront, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours across 16 settlements in the region. And according to the Ukrainian officials, Russian strikes killed at least 2 people and injured 10 others in the region.
To see a full restoration.
And according to Ukrainian media, Trump's Ukraine envoy is expected to visit Kiev in the coming days for talks with President Zelensky. Zelensky, meanwhile, said on social media that he had a productive call with Trump, where they spoke about the ongoing hostilities and US policy towards Russia. There has been a spike in Russian aerial attacks in Ukraine in recent weeks. In July alone, Russia reportedly launched over 6,000 drones into Ukrainian territory. That's the highest monthly total since the war started in February 2022. Moscow, remember, has made it clear that any long-term settlement would need to include Ukraine's recognition of Russia's control over Crimea and 4 additional regions. And before we go on any further, here's a quick look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. We will be continuing to track the major Russia-China joint naval drills that have now entered a crucial last phase. And we're telling you more about the messaging and the significance. We are zooming into the latest on the China-Taiwan tensions as a new study raises serious concern over Taiwan's energy security in the event of a possible Chinese blockade. We get you the complete story. A special report on the latest in India's Uttarakhand as it reels from the impact of nature's fury. All this and more coming up. With nuclear submarines lurking off European shores, missile curbs tossed away in a way, and new nuclear bombs appearing on British soil, the world stands on a precipice. As Washington and Moscow trade threats, and amid rapid deployments, the last restraints seem to have snapped. Our next report taking a closer look at how the United States and Russia are now edging into the most dangerous territory seen since the darkest Cold War nights.
Cold waters, hot thrills. Russia and China are hunting for enemy submarines. The Russian and Chinese navies, a combined force of increasing sophistication, are showcasing anti-submarine aircraft and helicopters to locate and neutralize their target. Thousands of troops, dozens of warships, submarines and aircraft from both countries are taking part in massive joint military drills called Joint Sea 2025 in the Sea of Japan. A region bristling with geopolitical tension. The drills comes days after Trump moved US nuclear subs closer to Russian waters. This is no coincidence. It's strategic signaling turned live exercise. A clear and direct message to Washington and its allies in the Pacific, including Japan and South Korea, that the emerging alliance of the East is a formidable force to be reckoned with.
In the first half of the day, the deployment of a detachment of warships to the exercise area was carried out, followed by joint maneuvering. In the second half, an air defense exercise involving a detachment of warships and naval aviation was conducted. Each phase was led by both the Chinese and Russian navies.
What makes this exercise particularly interesting is its precision and coordination. Chinese Y-8 anti-submarine aircraft and IL-38 planes from Russia's Pacific Fleet as well as helicopters were part of the drills.
Combat operations do not take place at a fixed time or location, and anchorage zones are by no means safe, so we need to step up defenses. We must guard against threats like frogman infiltrations and small boat attacks. We have learned a great deal from exchanges with the Russia forces over the past 2 days.
An increasing number of drills by both Russia and China have been focused in the Pacific in recent years. In this region, Beijing holds maritime disputes with other nations along the South China Sea, while Moscow maintains a long-standing territorial dispute over the sovereignty of an island chain with Japan. Both sides are calibrating their brinkmanship for a world on edge. No longer are these exercises theoretical. With tensions flaming and mistrust entrenched, every simulated attack carries a warning. Today's practice could become tomorrow's battle. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Russian and Chinese warships fired their final shots in the Pacific as their joint naval drills entered the last phase. The Maritime Interaction 2025 exercise had artillery fire, anti-submarine warfare operations and aerial reconnaissance, with both sides vowing deeper cooperation at sea. Take a look. A new study has raised serious alarm over Taiwan's energy security in the face of a possible Chinese blockade. According to a report by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies, Taiwan would run out of natural gas within just 10 days if China were to cut off maritime access. The island's coal reserves would stretch to about 7 weeks, and oil stocks would only hold out for roughly 20 weeks. Now, these numbers basically highlight a grim reality. According to a report by the think tank, Taiwan relies heavily on imported fuel. Nearly 98% of its energy needs come from foreign sources, while liquefied natural gas alone fuels around 40% of Taiwan's power generation. If shipping lanes were blocked, the energy system, along with hospitals, factories, data centers, would be thrown into chaos almost immediately. The report comes amid rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Recent Chinese military drills have mimicked blockades and strikes on key infrastructure. China recognizes Taiwan as part of its own territory, and Beijing has on multiple occasions stated that it will incorporate Taiwan by the year 2027. And to assess the risks, CSIS analysts simulated 26 different war game scenarios. And the findings revealed that a blockade would not be a clean or easy operation for China. Interestingly, most simulations led to high casualties and often triggered wider regional wars. And in the most severe scenarios, US forces struck mainland China, while Chinese missiles hit American military bases in Guam and Japan. The report warns that a blockade would drain China's military strength and alert other countries, likely triggering global pushback. It also cast doubt on the idea that Taiwan would be or could be supported through a strategy similar to what the West used in Ukraine. The report argues that such an approach would not be enough. China's naval chokehold would be far too tight and Taiwan's fuel demand far too great. Even in cases where US convoys broke through the blockade, the effort came at steep costs. Many missions faced direct combat with Chinese forces, making them high risk and unsustainable. What exactly are we to make of all of this? It's clear here that Taiwan's energy vulnerability is a critical weak point, and a blockade scenario would basically and could quickly spiral into an all-out global conflict. In India's Uttarakhand, the death toll has risen to 5. Scores of people reported missing after the cloudburst triggered flash floods in Uttarkashi's Dharali area. In fact, rescue and relief efforts are ongoing, led by the Indian Army, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, National Disaster Response Force and the State Disaster Response Force. Access routes to and from Uttarkashi remain cut off due to heavy rainfall and flash floods following the cloudburst. Despite the rough terrain posing a significant challenge in the rescue efforts, Army tracker dogs, drones and earth-moving equipment have been deployed for evacuation and providing essential supplies since Tuesday. The Indian Army has kept its Mi-17 and Chinook helicopters on standby to look for the stranded. According to government officials, at least 190 people have been rescued so far. Indian Air Force Chinook, Mi-17, V-5, ALH and Cheetah helicopters are on active standby at the Chandigarh Air Base, ready to deploy with equipment and relief material as soon as the weather conditions improve. The Weather Department has issued warnings for heavy rainfall across the state, especially in the hilly areas. A delegation of parliamentarians from Uttarakhand met Prime Minister Modi to brief him on the rescue and relief operations. The Chief Minister also carried out an aerial survey to assess the flood-hit areas in the district. In fact, the Uttarakhand Chief Minister has said that the Prime Minister as well as the Home Minister have assured all possible support from the central government. 2 cloudbursts, one in Dharali and another in the Sukhi Top area, caused widespread destruction, with Dharali bearing the brunt. In fact, according to the officials, the market area in Dharali was completely swept away due to the rising water levels. A mudslide in the Kheergarh area also triggered a sudden flow of debris and water through the settlement. The space race has taken a nuclear turn. Superpowers are preparing to plant reactors rather than flags on lunar soil. The US now fast-tracking plans to build atomic infrastructure on the moon by 2030. But the US will not be alone on the lunar surface. In fact, Russia and China are racing ahead with their own nuclear ambitions for 2035. The question is no longer over who will reach the moon first, but who will claim it with nuclear power.
The moon is about to become humanity's first nuclear colony. 3 nuclear superpowers have declared their intent to transform Earth's celestial neighbor into an atomic-powered outpost. This is not science fiction, this is a new reality of cosmic competition. According to reports, NASA Administrator Sean Duffy has issued an urgent directive to accelerate construction of a 100-kilowatt nuclear reactor on the lunar surface, superseding previous plans for a less powerful 40-kilowatt system. But the US is not alone in this cosmic power grab. Russia and China have already signed a deal to construct their own nuclear power plant on the moon, targeting completion by 2035 as part of their jointly developed International Lunar Research Station.
3, 2, 1, boosters in, and liftoff of Artemis 1.
The lunar night, which can last for 2 weeks, makes solar power an unreliable option for a permanent human settlement. A nuclear reactor, however, would provide a continuous high-output energy source, enabling inhabitants, mining equipment and scientific laboratories to operate around the clock. Clearly emerging as a 3-way nuclear race played out against the stark backdrop of space, where the stakes are nothing less than dominance over humanity's future in the cosmos. The US fears that if China and Russia make it to the moon before it does, they could barricade a part of the moon, declaring it a keep-out zone, basically pushing it out of the area. This race is no longer about science, it is about who will write the first laws, carve up territories and dictate access to trillions of dollars worth of lunar minerals. One side's triumph could lock out the rest for decades to come. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
How much would you pay to stay at the place of your choice? Of course, any trip costs money, but we are talking about something different here. According to the US State Department, President Donald Trump's administration will require visa applicants from Zambia and Malawi to pay bonds up to $15,000 for some tourist and business visas under a pilot program launching in 2 weeks. Listen to this first.
Consistent with Executive Order 14159, beginning August 20th, nationals of Malawi and Zambia applying for B1, B2 business and tourist visas will be required to post a bond of up to $15,000. This targeted common sense measure reinforces the administration's commitment to U.S. immigration law while deterring visa overstays.
And just for context here, the bond amount will reportedly be returned to the applicant if the applicant leaves America within the allowed window of the time in line with their visa and all the terms of their visa status. First, for those unaware, what exactly is a visa bond? You must have seen that term doing the rounds. Simply put, it is a financial guarantee that some nations require for certain foreign nationals applying for temporary visas to ensure visa holders adhere to the terms of their visa, specifically the length of the stay. A State Department spokesperson had earlier said that countries would be identified based on high overstay rates, screening and vetting deficiencies, concerns regarding acquisition of citizenship by investment without a residency requirement, and foreign policy considerations. Now, just to zoom out and contextualize this for you, look at the larger scheme of things. What is this all about? And why is such a move being made in the first place? President Donald Trump has made cracking down on illegal immigration a major focus of his presidency, also boosting resources to secure the border and arresting people who are in America illegally. In fact, he issued a travel ban in June, remember, that fully or partially blocks citizens of 19 nations from entering the US on national security grounds. According to US Customs and Border Protection data, from the fiscal year 2023, numerous countries in Africa, including Burundi, Djibouti, also had high overstay rates. Just for the specifics here, in the latest move, the State Department notice had said on Tuesday that visa holders who have posted a visa bond must arrive and depart America via 3 specific ports of entry, which it listed out. And it also warned that if such travelers arrive or depart from anywhere else, they could be denied entry or their departure may not be appropriately registered. On to France now, which is battling its worst wildfires of the year with flames tearing through villages in the southern region. 1 person has reportedly died. Thousands are without power. Hundreds of houses are in ruins. Firefighters are warning the blaze is still spreading fast and remains far from under control. It's one of fashion's oldest and most dangerous obsessions, glorifying thinness at the cost of health. And this time, it's Zara in the spotlight. The global fashion giant just had 2 of its ads banned for featuring what regulators called unhealthily thin models. The latest incident in which the fashion industry's aesthetic ideals are coming under growing scrutiny, not just for what they showcase, but also for what they, in a way, silently promote. The UK has banned 2 Zara ads. UK's Advertising Standards Authority has ruled that both campaigns were what they termed socially irresponsible because the models looked unhealthily thin, with protruding collarbones, limbs made to appear unnaturally slim through poses, shadows, styling choices in a way. And in one ad, the slick back hairstyle and lighting cast deep shadows across the model's face. In another, the cut of a shirt and the model's pose drew attention to protruding collarbones, as they were described. In fact, the ASA noted how the model's elbow joints and thin limbs looked, quote-unquote, out of proportion. And in both cases, the concern was not just how the models looked, it was also about how the images were allegedly styled to emphasize their thinness. Zara responded saying the models were medically certified to be in good health and that the images were only lightly edited for lighting and color. But this entire row is not an isolated one. In fact, in July, the ASA banned a Marks & Spencer ad for a similar reason. It showed a model, allegedly, whose pose and styling made her appear unhealthily thin. Earlier this year, in fact, Next had an ad pulled for its use of camera angles that exaggerated, allegedly, the thinness of a model's legs. Next defended its choice, saying the model was slim but healthy and toned. But the UK regulator's message is clear. If fashion images and brands only promote one type of body, they promote harmful body ideals. And for ASA, that crosses a crucial line. These bans are part of a growing reckoning in fashion, one that's decades in the making. While brands insist their models are healthy, the images that they publish often tell a different story. And now with the UK regulator drawing a hard line, maybe it's time for everyone to reevaluate what is it that we actually define as aesthetically pleasing. Japan paused this morning to remember one of the darkest days in human history, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. On the 80th anniversary of that devastating day, a ceremony was held with around 55,000 people, including dignitaries from 120 countries and regions, at exactly 8:15 a.m. local time. The moment the bomb exploded over Hiroshima, the crowd observed a minute of silence, honoring the tens of thousands who lost their lives instantly and in the months that followed. The Prime Minister of Japan addressed the gathering after placing a wreath at the Peace Memorial. He urged world leaders to recommit to nuclear disarmament and strengthen the global non-proliferation framework.
The current security environment is becoming increasingly severe. However, it is precisely because of this that we must make every effort to realize a world without nuclear war and ultimately a world without nuclear weapons under the framework of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which serves as the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime.
The uranium bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, killed 78,000 people instantly. And by the end of that year, radiation exposure had brought the death toll to approximately 140,000. 3 days later, the US dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Decades later, nuclear weapons remain a looming threat. Despite being used only twice in warfare, the destructive potential continues to cast a long, dangerous shadow. Experts and survivors alike warning that the risk of nuclear conflict is now higher than it has been in decades. One such voice is that of atomic bomb survivor Masako Wara, who spoke about the dangers of ignoring history.
Armed states and their allies should recognize the fact that due to their insincerity and arrogance, the entire human race is on the brink of nuclear war. In today's unstable world, the risk of nuclear weapons use is the highest since the end of the Cold War.
And according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, there are more than 12,000 nuclear bombs across the world. So from the recent Russia-US nuclear saber-rattling to the US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, the nuclear shadow is far from gone. Even 80 years later, Hiroshima reminds the world that the nuclear threat still looms. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks for watching.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Prime Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at juhi@such.org.in.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening. As we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
The Earth is sending distress signals. Wildfires, droughts, and melting glaciers. Can we reverse the damage? Explore the harrowing effects